My name is Clara. I'm 34 years old, and if you looked at my life on paper, you'd probably think I spend my days drowning in the most boring details imaginable. I'm an estate and tax paralegal in a quiet town just outside Denver. My entire world revolves around numbers, probate codes, asset allocations, and managing risk. I'm the person people call when they need to clean up a legal mess or ensure their hard-earned money doesn't vanish into thin air. I like structure. I like predictability. In my line of work, if a number doesn't balance, you don't emotionalize it. You look for the error, you fix it, and you move on. Numbers don't lie, they don't hold grudges, and they don't try to manipulate you at Sunday dinner. But right now, as I sit here on the sun-bleached planks of a private wooden dock at Lake Tahoe, the numbers are doing something very loud. My phone is sitting next to my cold cup of coffee, and it is buzzing relentlessly. It's vibrating so hard against the wood that it's making a low, rhythmic rattling sound. The screen lights up, goes dark, and immediately lights up again. 44 missed calls. 44. My 8-year-old daughter, Chloe, actually started counting them when we first arrived, thinking it was a hilarious vacation game. "Mommy, it's ringing again. That's number 14. Eventually, I had to gently slide the phone away from her view because, behind those flashing numbers, there is a storm I spent months watching build from a distance. I take a slow sip of my coffee and look out over the water. The lake looks like a sheet of deep, solid blue glass under the afternoon sun. A few hundred yards away, my 6-year-old son, Leo, is wearing a pair of bright green neon swim trunks, completely absorbed in trying to feed a family of ducks with pieces of a leftover sandwich. Chloe is sitting cross-legged next to him, her hair still damp from our morning swim, laughing at how the ducks waddle. It is peaceful. It is the exact definition of a sanctuary. But exactly 4 miles across this very same lake on the north shore, my mother and my older sister Evelyn are living in a completely different reality. Right now, they are standing in the meticulously manicured parking lot of the Grand Crest Alpine Lodge, an ultra-exclusive, 5-star luxury resort where the rooms cost more per night than I make in a week. They are surrounded by matching leather luggage that Evelyn insisted they buy for the aesthetic of the trip. My mother is likely sitting on a concrete bench, clutching her designer purse with white knuckles, while Evelyn is at the front desk, her face turning a dangerous shade of crimson, screaming at a 20-something resort clerk who simply cannot give them the keys to a luxury suite they haven't actually paid for. They are stranded. Their dream vacation has completely imploded before it even started, and they are realization-starved, desperate, and frantic. Hence, the 44 phone calls currently rattling the wood planks beneath my feet. But I didn't get to this dock by accident, and they didn't get to that parking lot by bad luck. Let's pull up a chair, take a breath, and talk honestly for a moment. Grab your coffee. Because if you're listening to this right now, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been the person in your family who quietly carries all the weight? The one who pays for the groceries, balances the schedules, fixes the emergencies, and gets absolutely zero appreciation in return? Have you ever noticed that people never actually value the safety net until they fall backwards and realize you finally rolled it up? If you have ever had to earn your place in your own family, or if you've ever had to quietly learn the hard lesson of setting a boundary that made people angry, do me a favor. Pause right now and type the word reality in the comments below. Let me know I'm not the only one who has had to stand her ground. Because for a very long time, I didn't stand my ground. I was the reliable one, the useful one. And it took a calculated, painful betrayal by my own flesh and blood to realize that in my family, being useful was the only thing keeping me in the room. This is the story of how my sister tried to erase my children from our family's history, and how she accidentally handed me the exact blueprint I needed to lock her out of my life forever. To understand how my sister and mother ended up stranded in that luxury parking lot, you have to understand how we got here. In my family, money was never just currency. It was a language, a weapon, and a metric of worth. As an estate and tax paralegal, I look at life through the lens of liability and liquidity. I know that an unhedged risk will always catch up to you. My daily routine for the past 7 years has been an exercise in military precision. Wake up at 5 a.m. Pack 2 distinct lunches. Chloe wants her sandwiches cut into triangles with no crust, and Leo requires entirely separate compartments for his fruit because if a strawberry touches his crackers, the world ends. Drop them at school and daycare, arrive at the firm by 7:45 a.m., review probate filings, manage liquidations, track capital gains, pick the kids up by 5:30 p.m., cook dinner, handle baths, read stories, and repeat. I maintained a color-coded budgeting spreadsheet with 18 individual tabs. I tracked our utility trends. I knew exactly which day of the month the local organic grocery store marked down their meats, and I kept a dedicated vacation fund at a completely separate credit union, contributing $200 every single month via autodraft. I treated that account like it was radioactive, untouchable, invisible, earmarked solely for my children's future memories. I had to be that disciplined. When you are a single mother raising 2 young kids on a fixed paralegal salary in an area where the cost of living climbs every single year, you don't have the luxury of guessing if a check will clear. But being meticulous with money in a family that treats finance like a fantasy novel is a dangerous position to be in. People don't just envy your stability. They actively resent your caution. They look at your savings account not as a product of sacrifice, but as an untapped resource for their own desires. They view your ability to say no as an act of hostility rather than an act of survival. And that brings me to my older sister, Evelyn. Evelyn is 36, 2 years older than me, and she operates in a completely different universe. She is an independent interior decorator, a career that, from the outside, looks incredibly glamorous. Her Instagram feed is a beautifully curated gallery of high-end fabrics, minimalist living rooms, and gold-accented light fixtures. If you judged her life solely by her social media presence, you would think she was on the verge of buying a mansion. She drives a leased pearl-white luxury SUV, wears designer sunglasses indoors, and sends her 2 children, Madison and Tyler, to private art camps. But because of my profession, I don't look at the paint on the wall. I look at the foundation. And Evelyn's foundation was built entirely on a deck of maxed-out credit cards, personal loans, and a staggering amount of leveraged pride. She lived in a perpetual state of financial triage, robbing Peter to pay Paul, all while maintaining the absolute illusion of wealth. She was the kind of person who would spend $400 on an aesthetic leather weekend bag, but complain that the utility bill was unexpectedly high. Worse than her financial recklessness, though, was her understanding of family leverage. Evelyn knew exactly how to play my mother, Lorraine. Madison and Tyler were the perfect, photogenic grandchildren. They wore the matching linen outfits Evelyn picked out, they posed beautifully for family photos, and Evelyn used them as emotional currency. If my mother didn't agree with Evelyn's plans, or if my mother spent too much time talking to me, Evelyn would subtly drop hints that she was too busy to bring the kids over for the weekend. My mother, terrified of being isolated from her grandchildren, folded every single time. Evelyn's children were her ultimate leverage, and she spent that currency freely to ensure she remained the undisputed favorite daughter, leaving me to be the invisible infrastructure that kept the family from collapsing under the weight of her chaos. The unspoken rule of our family architecture became crystal clear during my father's final month alive. He was a master electrician, a quiet, observant man named Arthur who had spent 41 years running wires through the dark, cramped crawl spaces of residential homes. He was 65 when his lungs finally gave out from decades of breathing in dust and structural neglect. I remember the day perfectly. It was a bleak, overcast Tuesday, and the rain was hitting the glass of his room at St. Jude's Medical Center with a heavy, metallic thud. Evelyn and I were standing on opposite sides of his hospital bed. We looked like two entirely different species. Evelyn was on her phone, intensely texting a fabric vendor, her designer handbag slung over the back of a sterile hospital chair. I was sitting on a low stool, quietly holding his rough, calloused hand. My father didn't look at Evelyn. He looked straight at me, his breathing shallow beneath the plastic oxygen mask. He reached under his thin hospital pillow and pulled out a worn, expanding leather portfolio. It was the same one he used to track his commercial contracts. He placed it in my lap. "Clara," he whispered, his voice sounding like sandpaper on wood. "You have the steady hand. Your sister builds castles out of sand, but you build them out of stone. I need you to handle things. Keep the lights on for your mother. That's all I'm asking." Inside that portfolio was everything. His life insurance policy, his small union pension details, the bank logins, and a meticulous, handwritten list of my mother's monthly overhead costs. Evelyn didn't say a single word while we were in that room. She waited until the heavy stainless steel elevator doors slid shut in the hallway. Her face had gone completely pale with envy. She didn't look at me. She just stared at the shifting floor numbers. The second we hit the parking garage, my phone buzzed in my coat pocket. It was a text from her. "Dad always did trust his little accountant more. Enjoy the promotion." I sat in my car for nearly 30 minutes weeping, not because of her cruelty, but because I knew the massive, exhausting burden my father had just placed squarely on my shoulders. He loved Evelyn, but he knew she was a financial black hole. He had watched her bounce checks borrow thousands from his retirement that vanished into her boutique, and he knew that if she controlled the estate, our mother would be homeless within 18 months. When he passed away 3 weeks later, the life insurance paid out exactly $90,000. I sat at my small kitchen table with a legal pad, a calculator, and my father's ledger. I cleared his remaining medical debt, doc $28,000. I replaced the leaking roof on my mother's house, doc $12,500, and I upgraded her ancient HVAC system, docs $6,200. The remaining balance of $43,300 was placed into a high-yield savings account completely in my mother's name. It was an emergency fund, untouchable, designated solely for her long-term survival. On top of that, I quietly established a recurring monthly transfer of $400 from my own checking account into my mother's checking account to cover her grocery gap and rising prescription costs. Social Security only goes so far when you're living alone. Evelyn, of course, contributed absolutely nothing. "I have a luxury brand to scale and private camps to fund," she told me over the phone without a hint of shame. Instead, she offered creative direction for Mom's life while I paid the water bill. To make matters easier for my mother, who struggled with technology, I left a secondary debit card tied to a joint checking account we shared. I kept a baseline of my own emergency cash in there, telling her it was strictly for her pharmacy trips, unexpected plumbing issues, or groceries if her main account ran low. It was an ultimate safety net. I trusted my mother implicitly. I never dreamed that the sister who refused to contribute a single dollar to our mother's care would, Find a way to turn that very act of daughterly devotion into a weapon to use against my own children. The betrayal didn't happen in a dark room, it happened in broad daylight, surrounded by the smell of roasted chicken and home-cooked sides. It was the first Sunday of April. My mother's house was warm, the spring breeze pushing through the open windows of the dining room. I had spent the morning baking 24 lemon blueberry tarts, Chloe's favorite, while Leo carried the container proudly into the house like it was a chest of gold. The afternoon was normal until we sat down for dessert. Evelyn cleared her throat, setting her crystal water glass down with a deliberate, sharp click against the wooden table. She adjusted her posture, sliding her designer watch down her wrist, and looked across the table at me. "Clara, we need to discuss the summer vacation," she said, her voice smooth, perfectly rehearsed. "Mom and I have been talking, and we've decided to upgrade this year. The old cabins at Jekyll Island are just too rundown. They don't have the space, and frankly, they don't fit the direction we're trying to take. I've sourced a phenomenal suite at the Grand Crest Alpine Lodge up at Lake Tahoe." I blinked, setting my fork down. "Tahoe? Evelyn, that's thousands of dollars more than our usual budget. I've already budgeted for our standard cabin rental." "Well, that brings me to the second part," Evelyn said, her eyes narrowing slightly, her expression shifting into something cold and analytical. "This resort is highly curated. It's an adult-focused, premium aesthetic. Madison and Tyler are older, and they're enrolled in the resort's elite teen alpine club for the week. Your kids, well, Chloe and Leo are just too young for what we're doing this year. They're too loud, they don't fit the itinerary, and frankly, my kids just want a sophisticated family dynamic this summer without having to babysit toddlers." The words hit the room like a heavy, suffocating weight. I looked past Evelyn, straight at my mother. Lorraine wouldn't look at me. She was staring intently at her plate, her fingers trembling slightly as she held her napkin. And then I saw it. Resting right next to my mother's water glass, held between her thumb and index finger like a tiny shield, was the secondary debit card I had left with her. The card tied to my emergency account. "Mom," I said, my voice dropping an octave, completely calm but entirely steady. "Why is my card on the table?" My mother swallowed hard, looking up at Evelyn for permission before speaking to me. "Clara, Evelyn said she needed the card information to secure the booking tier. She said you wouldn't mind because it's for the family." Let's just pause right here. If you are listening to this, I want you to look at your own life for a second. Have you ever sat across from the people who raised you, the people who are supposed to protect you, and realized they see your boundaries as nothing more than a suggestion? Have you ever had your kindness treated like a blank check for someone else's vanity? If you've ever had to take a deep breath and swallow the absolute heartbreak of seeing your children excluded by your own family, type the word strength in the comments right now. I didn't yell. I didn't let my chest heave. I looked at the card, then I looked at my sister's tight, triumphant jaw. "Keep the card on the table, Mom," I said quietly. I stood up, walked into the living room, gathered Chloe and Leo's jackets, and walked out the front door into the crisp spring air without looking back. The drive home from that dinner was entirely silent. Chloe and Leo could sense the shift in my posture. They knew that the quiet, controlled way I gripped the steering wheel meant an adult storm was brewing. I got them into the apartment, made them a fresh batch of popcorn, and turned on their favorite animated movie to keep them distracted. Once the door to their bedroom was firmly shut, I sat down at my kitchen island with a glass of water, my laptop open, and my phone face down. I didn't have to wait long to discover the full scope of what Evelyn was planning. 2 days later, I was sitting on the porch of Pam Whitfield's house. Pam was a lifelong friend of my father's and worked in the administrative office of our local community center. She was the kind of woman who noticed everything and forgot nothing. She set down a pitcher of iced tea, looked at me with deep empathy, and laid out exactly what had happened behind the scenes. Evelyn hadn't just casually decided to upgrade the vacation. She had planned it like a corporate takeover. A week prior, her ex-husband, a commercial developer who knew how leveraged Evelyn's boutique truly was, had refused to lend her $5,000 for her summer expenses. Evelyn was facing a massive image crisis. She had already told her high-end clients and her social media followers that she was spending the summer at a luxury alpine estate. She couldn't back down without exposing the reality that her business was drowning in debt. So, she looked for an easier target. She sat our mother down and spun a psychological web. She convinced Mom that because I was a single mother with a simple paralegal salary, my lifestyle was cheap and I was quietly hoarding the money our father had left behind. She told Mom that since I wouldn't be paying for 2 children's resort fees, it was only fair that the emergency account I funded should be tapped to cover the massive, non-refundable deposit for the Grand Crest Alpine Lodge. Evelyn called it a family rebalancing. She actively weaponized our mother's fear of isolation, telling her that if the deposit wasn't paid using my card, she wouldn't be able to afford to bring Madison and Tyler on a vacation at all. My mother had folded under the pressure. She handed over the card details, allowing Evelyn to link my primary emergency fund directly to a $4,500 premium reservation tier. I sat on Pam's porch, listening to the ice melt in my glass, feeling a cold, heavy clarity wash over me. How do you look at your own sister and realize she doesn't see you as a sibling, but as an interest-free, unhedged line of credit? How do you realize your mother is willing to sacrifice your children's happiness just to pacify someone else's vanity? Let's pause right there. If you're listening to this, I want you to ask yourself a very serious question. Have you ever realized that the people who demand the most flexibility from you are always the ones who offer you absolutely zero room to breathe? Evelyn thought she was being brilliant. She thought that because I was quiet, because I always handled the bills and kept the peace, I would simply swallow the disrespect, complain to my spreadsheet, and let the charge go through for the sake of keeping the family together. She truly believed that her curated lifestyle gave her the right to dictate the value of my children. But what Evelyn forgot is that while she spent her career decorating the surface of things, I spent my career studying the legal mechanisms that control the foundation. She wanted a chess match, but she didn't realize I had already spent 7 years managing the board. I didn't lose my temper, and I didn't send an angry wall of text to the family group chat. In my line of work, the moment you let emotion dictate your strategy, you've already lost. Instead, I sat down at my desk the very next morning, turned on my computer, and treated this betrayal like a standard corporate compliance audit. Evelyn thought she had outsmarted me by getting our mother to hand over the physical card details, but she didn't understand the legal architecture of the account she was trying to drain. Because I had established that joint checking account solely to protect my mother, my name was the primary legal anchor on the title. My mother was listed as an authorized user with restricted administrative privileges. Evelyn assumed that an authorized user had the legal authority to allocate funds for luxury recreational reservations. She was wrong. During my lunch break at the firm, I walked across the street to the credit union. I sat down with a senior branch manager, a woman named Sarah who had helped me manage my father's estate accounts years prior. I laid out the documentation. Because the funds in that specific account were entirely generated by my personal payroll deposits, I legally revoked my mother's authorized user status, effective immediately. It took exactly 6 minutes. But I didn't stop there. I knew that if I simply closed the account, Evelyn would receive an immediate notification from the resort booking system stating that the card on file was invalid, giving her ample time to scramble, manipulate our mother into dipping into her actual retirement savings, or find another way to patch her financial hole. I didn't want her to have time to pivot. I wanted the system to work exactly the way she had set it up, with one minor adjustments to the numbers. I left the account open. I opened a completely separate, private estate trust account that required my explicit dual signature authorization for any external liquidity events. I systematically transferred every single dollar of my hard-earned savings out of the joint account. I moved the $2,600 from my primary vacation fund, the $1,400 from my checking cushion, and the emergency reserves. When I was finished, the old account, the one Evelyn had proudly linked to her luxury Tahoe reservation, sat there with a grand total of exactly $24.50. I told absolutely no one. I went back to my desk at the firm, opened a fresh stack of probate files, and spent the rest of the afternoon reconciling an estate tax return for a client who had passed away without a will. It was methodical, quiet work. You see, when you spend your life studying how structures collapse, you learn that the most effective boundary isn't a loud argument. It's a silent, immovable wall. Evelyn was playing a game of social media metrics and loud demands, completely unawares that the financial floor beneath her feet had just been replaced with thin air. She was counting on my predictable submission. But for the first time in my life, I was putting my children's security ahead of my family's comfort. Once the legal and financial walls were securely in place, I turned my attention to creating a real vacation for my children. I sat down at my kitchen table late that evening. The house completely still except for the low hum of the refrigerator. For years, I had been accumulating personal travel rewards and cashback points on my primary credit card. Points I had meticulously saved by routing all of my clients' non-corporate filing fees through my personal professional account and immediately reimbursing it from the firm's escrow. I had never touched them. It was a silent reserve, a contingency plan for a rainy day. I logged into the portal and began searching the Lake Tahoe inventory. I didn't want to go to a different destination. I wanted to be exactly where the conflict was centered, but on my own terms. I managed to find a stunning private cedar plank chalet located on the south shore of the lake. It featured a wraparound deck, an unobstructed view of the water, and a private dock where the kids could fish. Because of my accumulated rewards, the entire 4-night stay cost me virtually nothing out of pocket. I booked it instantly, and the non-refundable confirmation code hit my inbox 12 seconds later. As I printed out the itinerary, a brief, heavy memory surfaced. A moment from the previous summer that still made my chest tight. I remembered Chloe standing in our old hallway, her small face falling as she overheard Evelyn tell our mother over speakerphone that we shouldn't come to the weekend barbecue because her boutique clients were visiting, and my kids didn't have the right manners for that crowd. Chloe had looked up at me with tears in her eyes and whispered, "Mommy, did we do something wrong? Why don't they want us there?" That short, painful memory was all the validation I needed. I had spent years letting my sister cut pieces out of my children's self-worth just to keep my mother happy. Never again. I took a bright yellow sticky note, wrote the words LAK vacation on it, and pressed it onto the front of the refrigerator. I didn't include dates. I didn't include a location. I didn't include a single detail. In a family where information is weaponized, silence is your only true leverage. The next morning, Leo saw the note while I was pouring his cereal. His eyes went wide. "Are we going to the water, Mommy? With the big trees?" I smiled, and for the first time in months, the smile felt completely genuine, entirely unburdened. "Yes, sweetie, we're going to our own secret spot, and this time, nobody gets to tell us we don't fit." I zipped our duffel bags, tucked Chloe's starfish swimsuit and Leo's neon trunks deep into the trunk of my car beneath a spare blanket, and waited for the calendar to count down to the day of check-in. The day of check-in arrived with the kind of heavy, oppressive heat that makes the horizon shimmer. It was a Thursday morning when I loaded Chloe and Leo into my car, threw a bag of grapes and some turkey sandwiches into a cooler, and began the drive toward the south shore of Lake Tahoe. I had already taken the weekend off from the firm. My phone was tucked into the center console, completely silent, while the kids sang off-key to a radio pop song. We checked into our private chalet at noon. The space was pristine, smelling of pine wood and crisp linen, with a massive stone fireplace and a glass door that led directly down to our private wooden dock. But exactly 4 miles away, on the north shore of the lake, a very different scene was unfolding at the front desk of the Grand Crest Alpine Lodge. I know the exact agonizing choreography of that afternoon because my mother, entirely broken by the humiliation, confessed every single detail to Pam Whitfield a week later, and Pam passed it to me with the precision of a court reporter. Evelyn had pulled her luxury SUV into the resort's cobblestone driveway at exactly 2:00 p.m. She stepped into the grand timber-framed lobby wearing her oversized designer sunglasses, her 2 kids trailing behind her with matching leather weekend bags. While our mother walked slowly behind them, her knees stiff from the 4-hour drive. Evelyn walked up to the check-in counter with the absolute confidence of a woman who believed she was about to step into her natural element. The front desk clerk, a young woman named Lindsay, wearing a crisp blue resort uniform, smiled politely and pulled up the reservation profile. "Welcome to the Grand Crest, Miss Pratt. I see your 2-bedroom Alpine suite is ready. We just need to process the remaining balance on the card on file to finalize your key allocation. The remaining total is $4,500. "Go ahead and run it," Evelyn said, waving her hand casually. "The card on file is authorized for the full stay." Lindsay swiped the card details that Evelyn had stolen from my mother's purse. The machine processing light blinked green, turned a solid, angry amber, and then a loud, high-pitched error, beep, echoed across the marble desk. Lindsay frowned, looking at her screen. "I'm sorry, ma'am. The transaction was declined. It's showing insufficient funds." Evelyn's smile froze. She pulled her sunglasses down to the bridge of her nose. "That's entirely impossible. It's a secured private family account. Run it again. Your machine must be dropping the encrypted signal." Lindsay ran it a second time. The exact same high-pitched error, beep, cut through the quiet luxury of the lobby. "Declined again, ma'am. Our system is completely functional. The clearinghouse is stating there is a total liquidity blockage on the account side." Evelyn's face turned from a tight, pale mask to a deep, dangerous crimson. She spun around on her heel, her eyes darting across the lobby to where our mother was sitting on a plush leather sofa. "Mom, get over here right now. What did Clara do to the account? Why is the card bouncing?" My mother scrambled off the sofa, her hands trembling as she pulled her wallet out of her purse. I don't know, Evelyn. The card has always worked. Clara puts the money in there every single month like clockwork." "Well, there's no money in it now," Evelyn hissed, her voice rising enough that a family checking in at the adjacent counter turned to stare. Lindsay pulled up the reservation terms on her monitor, her tone shifting into that cool, immovable professionalism that resorts use to handle problematic guests. "Ms. Pratt, Because this was an elite tier reservation during peak summer season, our policy states that if full payment cannot be secured within 15 minutes of arrival, the reservation is automatically voided. Furthermore, your initial $1,200 booking deposit is strictly non-refundable. If you have an alternative card with a $4,500 available limit, we can attempt to reinstate the room block, but the suite will be subject to current walk-in rates, which are an additional 20% higher. Sweet? Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. She frantically pulled her personal platinum credit card from her wallet and slammed it onto the counter. Run this one! Lindsay swiped it. Beep! Declined for credit limit overage, ma'am. Evelyn tried her secondary business card. Beep! Declined. Card restricted by issuer. Evelyn was entirely trapped in a cage of her own making. Her personal accounts were already maxed out to their absolute limits to fund her curated lifestyle, and the emergency line of credit she had tried to steal from me was sitting in a secure trust account 4 miles away, entirely out of her reach. She was standing in a 5-star lobby, surrounded by her children and her mother, completely bankrupt of options, exposed for exactly what she was. A beautifully decorated house with absolutely no foundation. The afternoon sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting a long, warm amber glow across the private dock of our chalet. I sat on the edge of the weathered wood planks, my bare feet dangling just a few inches above the cool, undisturbed water of Lake Tahoe. My phone was sitting a few feet behind me, face down, vibrating against the timber like an angry insect. 44 missed calls. I didn't have to listen to the voicemails to know exactly what they said. I knew the initial calls would be filled with Evelyn's sharp, demanding anger, accusing me of sabotaging the family, punishing her children, and being vindictive. I knew the later calls, the ones from my mother, would be filled with frantic, breathless tears, begging me to transfer the funds, asking how I could leave them stranded in a resort parking lot 4 miles away. But as I looked out at the water, I realized something profound. I wasn't angry anymore. The heavy, suffocating knot of resentment that I had carried in my chest for 7 years. The constant need to buy my family's approval by being their unpaid infrastructure had completely dissolved. Chloe was sitting a few feet away from me, her small fingers carefully holding a broken piece of a pine cone she had found on the shore. She looked up at me, her brown eyes completely clear and unburdened by adult manipulation. "Mommy, look at this. It's split right down the center, but it still looks like a little tree. Doesn't it?" I pulled her close, wrapping my arm around her shoulder, smelling the clean scent of lake water and sunscreen in her hair. "Yes, sweetie," I whispered, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Sometimes things have to split down the middle to show you what's actually strong inside them." Leo let out a loud, triumphant shout from the shallow water near the shore, splashing his legs wildly in his neon swim trunks. "Mommy, the ducks came back. They like our spot better." I laughed. A real, deep, unburdened laugh that echoed softly across the quiet bay. We stayed on that dock until the sky turned the color of bruised plums and deep violet. I didn't answer a single call that night. I didn't send a defensive text message. I didn't engage in the theatrical trauma my sister had spent weeks orchestrating. When you finally build an immovable wall around your children's peace, you don't look over it to see who's shouting on the other side. You just enjoy the garden you planted. It took 3 weeks before I finally agreed to meet my mother. We sat at a quiet corner table at a small, unassuming diner on Route 8, far away from Evelyn's influence. Lorraine looked smaller, her face lined with a deep, exhausting fatigue. She spent the first 10 minutes trying to deliver the script Evelyn had written for her, complaining that Evelyn's business had suffered an image crisis, that the $2,200 deposit was permanently lost, and that I had broken the family trust. I let her finish. I didn't interrupt. I just took a slow sip of my coffee, looked her straight in the eyes, and placed my father's old leather portfolio gently on the table between us. "Mom," I said, my voice completely calm, entirely devoid of malice, "I love you. But from this day forward, the bank accounts are permanently separated. The emergency card has been destroyed. If you want to see Chloe and Leo, our door is open every single Sunday. You can come over, eat lunch, and be their grandmother. But I am officially retired from funding a family dynamic that requires my children to be invisible so that Evelyn can look wealthy. I am done being the wallet." My mother stared at the leather portfolio for a long time. Her lips trembled, but for the first time in years, she didn't defend her oldest daughter. She just nodded quietly, her tears hitting the paper napkin in her lap. "I understand, Clara," she whispered. And for the first time, I think she actually did. Evelyn didn't call me that month or the month after. At our town's annual late summer community potluck, we stood on opposite sides of a crowded gymnasium, separated by folding tables, paper plates, and the heavy smell of barbecue. We made eye contact exactly once. Her gaze dropped instantly, her jaw tightening as she turned her back to me. There was no grand confrontation, no dramatic speech. Real life isn't a movie script. Sometimes victory is just standing on the opposite side of a room, eating potato salad, and realizing that a person's low opinion of you no longer has the power to cost you a single cent. Before we left the gymnasium, 10-year-old Madison broke away from Evelyn's table, ran across the polished floor, and grabbed Chloe's hand. "Aunt Clara, can Chloe come over to play next week?" I looked down at her, then across the room at Evelyn, who was watching us with a stiff, frozen expression. I smiled gently at my niece. "Of course, sweetie. Anytime you want to come to our house, you are always welcome." Because whatever toxic narrative Evelyn tried to feed her children about real family, the foundation I was building was strong enough to outlast her illusions. If you are listening to this right now and you are tired of being the only one holding up a structure that breaks your heart, remember this. Your kindness is not a subscription service that people get to renew without paying you basic respect. You have the right to lock the vault. You have the right to take your babies to the water. Type the word Bondaries in the comments if you are choosing your own peace today. Share this with one woman who needs the strength to say no, hit that subscribe button, and I will see you over our next cup of coffee in the next story. Warden.